Welcome to Hollywood Latest Reports. Grace Brumley's voice carried through the sanctuary this morning with a force and tenderness that no one in the congregation was prepared for. A sound so pure and disarming that it seemed to wrap itself around every heart in the room and pull hidden emotions to the surface. And although the service had begun like any other Sunday gathering, the atmosphere shifted the moment she stepped forward, took a breath, and released the first soft, trembling note that instantly stilled every whisper and pulled even the restless children into a deep quiet, as if something sacred had descended and demanded reverence. It wasn't just that her pitch was flawless or that her tone carried the sweetness she is known for, but there was a depth beneath it today, a rawness, a sincerity, a barely contained ache that struck people like a wave, setting off an immediate chain reaction of hushed sniffles, bowed heads, and hands quietly rising as her voice swelled higher, filling every corner with a warmth that felt less like sound and more like a blanket of comfort. And the musicians behind her seemed to sense it too, softening their playing so that her voice remained the center, the anchor, the heartbeat of the moment. And as she moved from the gentle opening into a stronger, more resolute chorus, something in her expression shifted. Her eyes glistened, her brow trembled, and it was clear she was not merely singing but pouring out something deeply personal, something lived rather than rehearsed, something felt rather than performed. People later said it was as if she was singing straight to them individually, touching the exact place inside where their private fears and quiet burdens lived. Because the moment her voice rose into a soaring cry that echoed against the vaulted ceiling, several people in the front rows visibly broke down, clasping their hands over their faces as tears streamed freely, while others tried unsuccessfully to blink them back, shoulders shaking as silent sobs took over. And still, Grace did not back away from the emotion threading itself through her. Instead, she leaned into it, letting the vulnerability color each note in a way that made her sound both impossibly strong and heartbreakingly fragile. And the congregation was swept up with her, like a single body, breathing, trembling, and absorbing every word as though it were a lifeline. By the time she shifted into the bridge, which she delivered barely above a whisper, the room felt suspended, like time had stopped or like the walls themselves were holding their breath. And in that delicate moment, even the soft hum of the lights and the rustle of the air conditioning seemed to fade, leaving only her voice, sweet, wavering, honest, carving straight into the core of everyone listening. And that was when the true emotional collapse happened. A wave of quiet cries and quivering gasps rolling outward from the choir section to the back pews, with men who rarely showed emotion wiping their faces with their sleeve, women clutching tissues timidly, teenagers who normally escaped through their phones staring forward with glassy eyes, and older members who had attended hundreds of services rocking gently as if trying to hold themselves together. And when she finally reached the final, lingering note, holding it with a steadiness that seemed impossible considering the intensity she had just released, the congregation reacted not with applause or noise, but with a heavy, reverent silence, the kind that only follows moments when everyone knows they have just witnessed something that cannot be replicated or manufactured, something that transcends talent and technique. And yet the stillness was broken quickly as one woman in the center aisle let out a sob so unrestrained that it echoed through the sanctuary, triggering others to follow in an outpouring of emotional release that seemed almost collective, as though Grace had unlocked the door to a room inside every person that they didn't realize they had sealed off. And this reaction wasn't rooted in sadness alone, but in relief, in gratitude, in the sudden reminder of how deeply the human heart can feel when stirred by something genuine. And Grace, overwhelmed herself, stepped back from the microphone with tears running freely down her cheeks, trying to steady her breathing as the pastor approached with a hand on her shoulder, visibly affected as well, needing a moment before he could even speak because the weight of the moment was too heavy, too tender, too charged with meaning to interrupt. And as the congregation slowly regained composure, many still dabbing at their eyes, others leaning against one another for support, the pastor finally addressed what everyone felt but couldn't articulate, acknowledging that what happened was beyond music, beyond performance, beyond anything that could be rehearsed or planned, describing it as a touch of grace in the purest sense, a moment when a human voice became a vessel for something greater. And those who spoke after the service echoed that sentiment repeatedly, saying that they had never heard Grace sing like that her sweetness had always been present, but today it was infused with something almost otherworldly, something that transformed the ordinary space into a sanctuary of healing. And as people lingered long after the benediction, forming small groups to talk softly about what they had felt, countless attendees confessed that they came into the church carrying heavy worries, family issues, illnesses, financial pressure, loneliness. But that something in her voice had loosened those knots. had made them feel seen, understood, comforted, and one elderly man who rarely spoke to anyone said it was the first time in years he had cried in public, and that it felt like a weight had been lifted. Meanwhile, Grace, still emotional, kept insisting she hadn't done anything special, that she simply sang the way she felt led. But those around her knew something extraordinary had passed through her today, something that didn't come from practice, but from a place of sincerity and openness that few people ever dare to reveal on a platform. And by the time the final members drifted out of the sanctuary, the wooden floor was dotted with damp tissues left behind by people who had run out of the strength to keep their feelings hidden. And the hush that remained after everyone left, an almost tangible quiet, felt like the lingering echo of her voice, a reminder of the moment that had shaken the entire church to its core and left no one unchanged. Later in the day, as word spread throughout the community, people who had not been present began calling friends and family members who had attended, asking what had happened, why so many were posting online about being moved, shaken, or renewed, and the responses all carried the same sentiment, that there are performances and then there are experiences, and what Grace offered was an experience of rare emotional power, the kind that etches itself into memory, into the soul, and becomes one of those defining moments people speak about years later. Saying I was there when her voice made the whole room cry. I was there when something in the air shifted, when the sacred felt suddenly near, and as night settled over the town, those who had been present found themselves replaying the moment in their minds, hearing the lingering echo of her sweetest high note, recalling the tremble in her voice that cracked open their own walls, and realizing they had witnessed something that could not be captured by cameras or recordings because it was not just sound, but spirit. And in the end, everyone agreed that Grace Brumley did not simply sing today. She opened hearts, stirred souls, and left the entire church in tears through the undeniable, unforgettable power of her voice. And even after the church doors closed and the day moved forward, the impact of Grace Brumley's voice continued to ripple outward in ways no one had anticipated, because those who had been present found themselves struggling to return to their normal routines, feeling as though a piece of them had been left in that sanctuary, suspended in the air where her voice had soared, and many described an unusual calm washing over them as they drove home, a calm that felt like the aftershock of something deeply spiritual, as though her song had reached past the noise of daily life and touched something buried within, something they hadn't realized needed attention. Some people later admitted that they cried again once they got home, not out of sadness but because the weight of what they had felt lingered, refusing to be shaken off, as if her voice had awakened a part of them that had long been asleep. And others said that they caught themselves humming the melody she sang even though they couldn't recall the exact lyrics, only the emotional imprint it left behind, the way it resonated like a memory rather than a song. The church's social media page was flooded with messages for hours, not the usual comments but long, heartfelt testimonies from people saying they couldn't fully explain what happened but that it felt like a breakthrough, like a moment they had needed without knowing it. And some wrote that they had gone into the service feeling numb and overwhelmed by their own problems. But Grace's voice pierced through that numbness and brought everything to the surface, allowing them to finally feel again, to release the frustrations and fears they had been carrying silently. And the pastor, reflecting on the morning, said he had rarely seen such a unified emotional response in all his years in ministry, describing it as a moment when the entire congregation moved in one rhythm, cried with one heart, and breathed in one shared sense of awe. Meanwhile, several choir members, still shaken by the experience, gathered privately to speak about what they had felt on stage behind her, saying that they had sensed the shift long before the congregation did, that the moment Grace opened her mouth they felt something powerful rising in the room, and one backup singer said she had to pull back from her microphone because she nearly broke down mid-song, overwhelmed by the softness and strength mingled in Grace's tone, a combination she had never heard from her before. People also began speculating quietly that something personal may have inspired her performance, not in a gossipy way, but in genuine concern and curiosity, because it was clear she had drawn from a deep emotional reservoir, and although no one knew what she had been carrying into the service, everyone agreed that she had channeled it into something breathtaking, using her vulnerability as a bridge between her heart and theirs. By the evening, conversations about the service spread beyond just those who attended, reaching members of neighboring communities, with many expressing regret that they had missed it, and asking if there would be a recording available, but those who had been present insisted that no recording could capture what truly happened, because the moment was not just about the note she hit, but the atmosphere in the room, the way the air thickened with emotion, the way people felt as though they were witnessing a deeply human moment of surrender and honesty. And such things simply cannot be translated into audio files or cameras. The pastor, recognizing the significance of the morning, spent much of his afternoon responding to messages from people asking how to process the emotions Grace's voice had stirred, offering gentle encouragement and reminding them that moments of deep emotional release are not something to hide or be ashamed of, but signs of the heart opening, healing, and reconnecting with itself. Grace herself, though exhausted, remained humble and almost shy about the effect she had on people, telling close friends that she had only done what she always does, sing from the heart, and that she didn't fully understand why today had been so different, though she admitted quietly that she too had never felt anything quite like what she felt on stage, saying that it was as if the words she sang were coming from a place she couldn't control but could only follow, and that the emotion she saw pouring from the congregation both moved her and unsettled her, not in a negative way, but in a way that made her aware of the responsibility and power that comes with using her gift. Some friends gently told her that this was not something to fear but something to honor, reminding her that very few people possess the ability to move others so deeply with nothing but the sound of their voice, and that perhaps the reason the room responded so strongly was because she allowed herself to be fully open, fully present, and fully vulnerable in a way that invited others to lower their own emotional walls. Later that night, as members of the congregation gathered around their dinner tables, many found themselves telling their families about the morning service with an intensity and clarity that surprised even them, recounting every small detail: the tremble in her voice during the opening notes, the powerful swell in the chorus,